Now, the Scottish National Party is urging voters to reject what they say will be more Westminster austerity cuts from the next Labour government by voting for them on Thursday.
The Scottish Labour have denied these claims and say only a Labour government will deliver the change that Scotland needs. Let's speak now to the SNP's Stephen Flynn. Morning, Mr Flynn. So here we are, 48 hours to go. John Swinney saying the result in Scotland is too close to call. What are you hoping will make the difference now?
Well, John Swinney is absolutely correct. I mean, in vast swathes of Scotland, it's very much up for grabs as to who's going to win this election. And in that context, what we're hoping is that voters vote for what it is that they believe in. Now, we know that whether it's the Conservative Party or the Labour Party, there's a conspiracy of silence on £18 billion worth of cuts that are coming down the line. That isn't our statement, that's the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies who are saying that. We need to reject that austerity. We need to see a return to the European single market. We need to see increased migration to boost our public services and, of course, our business sector. We need to see investment in net zero. We need to see Scotland's right to choose. We need to see a ceasefire in Gaza and the recognition of the Palestinian states. These are the key issues at this election. That is where the SNP stands. Those are the values that we have. Those are the issues that we believe in. And hopefully, over the course of the next 48 hours, voters will put their faith in us.
I would just say the IFS, who you just quoted there, they're also saying there's uncertainty around what will happen economically over the next year or so because there are no published plans beyond this year. Is your message getting across, do you think? Your message, let's not talk about the other parties. Is your message cutting through?
I believe so. And if I could just go back to your comment in relation to the IFS there, the reality is that what we are needing to see within the UK is, of course, a rejection of austerity, but we also need to see economic growth. And when it comes to economic growth, the answers are very simple. You rejoin the European single market, you increase freedom of movement or return to freedom of movement of people, and you double down on investment in net zero, the likes of £28 billion of investment. That's how you grow the economy. That's what America's doing, it's what Europe's doing, it's what nations across the globe are doing. Unfortunately, the quiet Westminster consensus that exists when it comes to Brexit, when it comes to the green tech of tomorrow, means that that's not going to happen. SNP MPs will go down to Westminster and argue for those things to happen because that's the right thing in order to grow our economy. And that's the most important thing here. Who do the people of Scotland want to go and represent them in Westminster? Do they want members of Parliament who'll go and sit quietly behind Keir Starmer and nod along? Or do they want members of Parliament who'll sit opposite Keir Starmer, will stand up to him on the biggest issues, who'll argue against austerity, argue for greater relations with the European Union, argue for investment in our NHS, action on the cost of living crisis, for Scotland's right to choose and recognition of the state of Palestine? If they believe in that, then vote for the SNP. And that, over the course of the next 48 hours, I believe will cut through to the general public and ensure that right across Scotland we can win the seats where it's a very close battle between ourselves and the Labour Party.
We know, don't we, that there's been an issue with postal voting, calls for a review of the postal voting system across Scotland after voters reported not receiving their ballots. How concerned are you about that?
I'm massively concerned about that, like almost every candidate across Scotland that I believe to be the case. I've had numerous emails from people who've not received their postal ballots. That's simply not good enough. We warned the Prime Minister of this when it became apparent that he was going to choose the election date, because of course for a huge majority of the people of Scotland it's now the school holidays. People are away on holiday. If their postal vote didn't land in time, then they're now disenfranchised from this election. They're not able to vote for who they want to represent them at Westminster, whether that's the SNP or otherwise. That's simply not good enough. Now, I see some individuals are blaming the Royal Mail, but the reality is the system is not fit for purpose, and we need to see huge reform, but we also need to see a big reflection on how we've managed to get into a situation where a Prime Minister can, at his own whim, declare an election. The Tories decided this was the way that they wanted elections to operate in the UK. It's obviously not working effectively for the population in Scotland, and that needs to change. But I guess most things when it comes to Westminster don't work very effectively for Scotland, which is why we need MPs who'll always put Scotland's interests first.
The Royal Mail this morning saying there is no backlog, so where is the problem?
Well, I would probably argue with some of the Royal Mail sentiments in relation to that, because if there's not a backlog, where's the postal votes for my constituents, people that I've formerly represented and hope to represent again, who don't have access to their postal votes? And we've seen it with election communications as well, which for candidates is something that we rely on for the Royal Mail to deliver. Now, normally when you send those to the Royal Mail, they deliver them on a set date. That's not happened. But this isn't necessarily just the fault of the Royal Mail or perhaps of some of those who are in charge of the elections. This is ultimately the fault of the Conservative government, who opted to have an election during the school holidays for a huge majority of people in Scotland. That's not good enough. And ultimately what they have sought to do is disenfranchise a huge amount of the population in Scotland at this election. Now, I think people in Scotland will look at that pretty dimly, and when it comes to casting their ballot on Thursday, I hope they vote for MPs who they know will go to Westminster and argue for Scotland's interests to be put first, and of course that's the SNP.
SNP wanting a vote for independence, both the Conservatives and Labour saying they won't consider another independence referendum. Would your energy, in fact, be better spent elsewhere?
Well, of course, as I've outlined, our focus has very much been on making sure that we reject the austerity consensus which is coming from Westminster, that we seek to rejoin the European single market, that we see investment in net zero technologies, that we have action on the cost of living crisis, investment in our NHS, that of course we recognise the state of Palestine and call for that immediate ceasefire, and indeed ensure that Scotland has its right to choose. And is it not outrageous that you're able to come and ask me a question that says that the future Prime Minister of the United Kingdom can tell voters in Scotland what he is going to do, irrespective of how they vote? So if the people of Scotland on Thursday determine that they want to vote for a party that will allow the people of Scotland to be able to determine their own future, Keir Starmer has said, no, I'm not even going to entertain that thought. That's not how democracy works, and quite frankly, it's not good enough for the Labour Party to say to the people of Scotland that their views and their voice don't matter. And ultimately, that's a key argument as to why it is so important that we have SNP representation in Westminster, not meekly sitting behind Keir Starmer, but standing up to him on the biggest issues of the day, including, of course, our constitutional future, because we are the only party that will put Scotland's interests first.
Stephen Flynn, thank you very much indeed. And you can find